or that inclination, it's going high. You can contrast it with Gauteng and Mpumalanga. We will see that Gauteng and Mpumalanga, their rates are going down quarter on quarter. Out of the 8.4 million people, 6.4 million are in what we call long-term unemployment. That is, they have been unemployed for 12 months or more. That 6.4 million returns the percentage share at 76.6%. And indeed, when we come to those that are in short-term unemployment, we are sitting at 2 million, accounting for 23.4%. Now, let us look at the sectors where people are employed. Let us start by saying that, and I want to deal with this issue of the informal sector. So, one of the issues when you deal with the informal sector, you're looking at businesses that are non-VAT paying. And of course, you are also looking at those businesses that employ less than 5 people. It could be own account businesses or persons who cook on the roadside, people who sell in trains, people who wash cars in the street. All those people are employed. In 2019, we brought out a report that indicated that we had about 1.1 million persons who were, or businesses in the informal sector. That was in 2019. That was the last report we produced in terms of the businesses. But with employment, we have been making it available quarter on quarter. So as of now, we are saying that 3.3 million people are employed in the informal sector or in the informal employment. And that represents a percentage share of 19.8%. Those in the formal sector come to 11.5 million, representing a share of 68.2%. Private households sitting at 1.1 million, accounting for about 6.6%, and 5.4% are those that are employed in agriculture, sitting at 906,000 persons. Let us see how the sectors have moved. The formal sector went up by 34,000 straight to 11.5 million. The informal sector went down by 19,000 to 3.3 million. Agriculture lost 24,000 jobs to 906,000 people employed in that sector. Private households gained 28,000 jobs, returning the number of those that are employed at 1.1 million. Which industries contributed the most? Trade contributed 88,000 jobs, followed by the private households, 28,000 jobs, construction, 20,000 jobs, mining, 3,000 jobs, and of course the percentage change for trade was 2.7%, private households 2.6%, 1.6% for construction, and mining 0.7%. And of course, community services, community and social services had the highest losses, recorded at 42,000, followed by both finance and agriculture, both losing 24,000 jobs each. Transport, 15,000 jobs lost. Utilities, as in electricity, gas and water, losing 6,000 jobs. And manufacturing, losing 5,000 jobs. The provinces, in terms of gains and losses, Gauteng and the Eastern Cape recorded the largest increases in employment in the second quarter of 2025, sitting at 95,000 and 89,000 respectively. The largest losses were in the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, sitting at 117,000 and 86,000 jobs lost. Another province that lost jobs was the Northern Cape at 28,000. Otherwise, the other provinces gained jobs. Let us look at levels of education. We can see, sitting at the national average of 33.2% as our headline unemployment rate, that those with less than matric are sitting at 39.4% unemployment rate. Followed by those with matric, the unemployment rate is sitting at 35.2%. Now, tertiary and other tertiary have an unemployment rate lower than the national average, with other tertiaries sitting at 21.7%, and for graduates sitting at 12.2%, which is the lowest unemployment rate in relation to educational cohorts. When we look at age cohorts, those aged 15 to 24 years, as well as those that are aged 25 to 34 years, returned unemployment rates of 62.2%, as well as 40.5% respectively. And indeed, as we go higher with age cohorts, we can see on the left-hand side the unemployment rate of those aged 35 to 44 years coming at 28.7%, and indeed those sitting at 55 to 64 years are having an unemployment rate of 12.8%. So as we see the older people in the labor force become, their unemployment rate tends to be smaller. Whereas when we look at the absorption rate and the participation rate, we will remember that the labor force participation rate is the number of those, is the proportion of those in working age who are either employed or unemployed, whereas the absorption rate is the proportion of those in working age who are employed. We can see that young people aged 15 to 24 years have the lowest absorption rate, the darker color, sitting at 10.1%. Going further to unpack, we can see that the unemployment rate of those 15 to 34 years is relatively higher and over time has always been higher than the national average, sitting at 46.1% as of the second quarter of 2025, versus that of those that are aged 35 to 64 years, sitting at 23.9%. And we can see that those aged 35 to 64 years, their unemployment rate has consistently been below the national average, in that it is buried within the pink color. Young people aged 15 to 24 years, we have 10.3 million in our country. Of those, 3.6 million are not in employment, education, or training, and they return a need rate of 35.2%. When we look further at young people, we can see that the need rate of those that are 15 to 34 years, now we are expanding the upper limit. In the lower line, we are having 15 to 24 years with a need rate on the right-hand side of 35.2%. But when we expand the age up to 34 years, we see that those that are sitting at 15 to 34 years, their need rate is sitting at 43.9%. Let us look at population groups. The national average sitting at 33.2%. On its right-hand side, we can see that the black Africans are the ones that have a higher than national average in terms of unemployment, sitting at 37.1%. And when we go back to the left, we can see that the white population group is sitting with the unemployment rate of 8.2%. The Indian Asian population group is sitting with an unemployment rate of 15.1%. The colored population group is sitting with an unemployment rate of 24%. Over time, we have seen the black African population group having a higher than national average. And we have seen the other three population groups sitting at lower than national average, with the white population group having the lowest unemployment rate. And this is explained in this slide, as we can see. For the black African group, the line has always been consistently higher than the pink shaded area, which means that their unemployment rate has been higher than the national average. Whereas for the other three population groups, their unemployment rate has been lower than the national average. But we can see that that of the colored population group is relatively higher, inching closer to the national average, whereas that of the Indian population group is in the middle, and that of the white population group sits lowest. Women in South Africa. We are saying that in the working age, we are sitting with 21 million women aged 15 to 64 years. Those that are in the labor force, that is either employed or unemployed, rather, having said that they were actively looking for employment, are sitting at 11.5 million. Of those, 4.1 million are unemployed, retaining an unemployment rate of 35.9%. The not economically active, the discouraged work seekers amongst women are 1.9 million, and other not economically active are sitting at 7.6 million. It will not be a complete picture until we contrast this with those of the males or men. We can see in the blue color that men tend to enjoy more employment than women. Women are sitting at 7.4 million employed. Men are sitting at 9.4 million employed, a gap of about 2 million people. And when we look at the unemployed, they are almost at the same level, with women sitting at 4.1 million, men sitting at 4.2 million. Discouraged work seekers, we have more women in the discouraged work seekers, sitting at 1.9 million versus men at 1.5 million. And other not economically active, we still have more women, with a gap of about 2 million. Women sitting at 7.6 million, men sitting at 5.6 million. When we look at the labor force participation rate for women, as well as the absorption rate, we can see that it remains and shows almost the same as the national measures. And of course, we are ready to say that their labor force participation rate increased from 51.8 million to 54.9 million, whereas the absorption rate decreased. It was sitting at 37.6 million, it went to 35.2 million, and of course retaining the gap of about 19.7 percentage points. When we compare men and women over time, in terms of the labor force participation rate, we can see that the labor force participation rate of women has increased. However, it remains lower than that of men. As we can see, men are sitting at 65.6%, women are sitting at 54.9%. And of course, when we look at the absorption rate, it's still the same. The absorption rate of women is sitting at 35.2% versus that one of males or men sitting at 45.3%. So we have about 10.1 percentage point difference. And of course, when we look at the unemployment rate over time, the shaded color pink is the national average. Men are having the blue color. We can see that the unemployment rate of males has been sitting consistently lower than the national average, whereas that of females has been relatively higher than the national average over time, over a decade. And possibly even if we were to move a few quarters backwards, we would still see the same. So the unemployment rate of men is sitting at 31% in the current quarter that we are reporting on, whereas that of women is sitting at 35.9%. When we unpack it, this unemployment rate by population group, we can see that the unemployment rate of Black African women is the highest at 40.2%. And of course, below the national average, we see the colored population group with the unemployment rate of women sitting at 23.5%, slightly lower than that of their male counterparts, which is sitting at 24.4%. But of course, for the Indian Asian population group, the unemployment rate of women is higher, 17.9%. That of the white population group sitting at 8.6% for women. When we go to the expanded unemployment rate, we can see again that for women, that is 51.4% of women in the working age are not employed. As we can see, we are sitting at 51.4% being the highest. And of course, when we look at the national average expanded, we are sitting at 47%. And indeed, the colored population group, women in the expanded unemployment rate account for 35.6%. And for the Indian Asian population group, women who are in the expanded unemployment state are sitting at 26.1%, and the white population group expanded for women sitting at 12.2%. And I want to bring the absolute numbers because sometimes it is difficult to look at the percentages. So we are saying that when we look at the expanded unemployment rate, we have about 12.6 million people unemployed, regardless of whether they are male or female, whether they are Black African, colored Indian, or white. But we are saying that the Black African woman in the expanded unemployment rate, we have about 5.9 million of women who are Black African. That is almost 6 million. The colored population group, 433,000. The Indian Asian population group sitting at 66,000. And the white population group sitting at 110,000. None of the other population group exceed 1 million. Only the Black African woman exceeds 1 million, and not just exceed, going as far as 6 million women unemployed in the expanded definition. Women were more likely to be employed in community and social services as well as in trade, finance, and private households. As we can see on the right-hand side, the bar for community and social services followed by that of trade, finance, and indeed private households, show a relatively bigger spread compared, for example, with men. Men in private households were sitting at 2.8% versus 11.4% for women. And indeed, women occupying managerial positions accounted for 6.8% versus 10.7% for men. As we can see, right in the middle, managers. But when we look at elementary work, we can see that both men and women are almost at similar levels, with men relatively higher than women. And when we come to clerks, men are accounting for 5.5%, whereas women are accounting for 17.6%. And all the way domestic worker, men are accounting for less than 1%, less than 0.5%, 0.4%, versus women sitting at 10.8%. Let us conclude. We are saying that the unemployment rate increased by 0.3 percentage point, and indeed it went straight to 33.2% in the second quarter of 2025. The absorption rate decreased by 0.1 percentage point, while the labor force survey increased by 0.2 percentage point. The number of those that were employed, unemployed, as well as the employed persons increased. The unemployed increased by 140,000, the employed increased by 19,000. The largest gains in employment were in trade, 88,000, followed by private households at 28,000. While, of course, the losses were more in services, 42,000, as well as in agriculture and finance, returning losses of 24,000 each. Women are more likely to be employed in community and social services, as well as in trade and finance. And of course, when they are there, they also stay in the areas of elementary work, sales and services, clerical work, domestic workership, technical and professional occupations. Just in case we forget, we are still in the field. Geospatial information frame, governance, public safety and justice survey, the quarterly labor force survey is rolling throughout the year, the general household survey rolling throughout the year, domestic tourism survey going on throughout the year, the consumer price index collected monthly, the living conditions survey, as well as the frame update projects are ongoing. Program director, this slide says Ndihela Gwala, but I'm not going to tell the story. All I can tell is that this month of August tells a story for our women in the country. And women, like young people, are trudging it hard in the labor markets. Black African women are much more vulnerable than any other population and sex cohort. And indeed, when you look at that in terms of being young, it's even much worse when you are young and you are a Black African woman. The next slide looks like it's blank. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We open the floor for questions. Members of the media are reminded to kindly identify themselves and the media house they are representing. Dr. Wazo, you first.
Good afternoon, Tokozo Kumalo from Newsroom Africa. Could we get a little bit more detail around the data of what happened in agriculture with those, I think it was 24,000 jobs shed? What does the data sort of point to there? As well around graduate unemployment edging back up if we have any more insights into that data. Thank you.
Ndando?
Thank you, SG. It's Ndando Tugwana from Bloomberg News. Maybe, SG, could you please elaborate on which of the subsectors in finance shared the most jobs? And also, I note jobs shared in social services, and maybe just a little bit of an elaboration on whether that is related to funding cuts by the US. Thank you very much.
Good day, Tshepo Moai, SABC News. It's on agriculture again. If we can make any connection with regards to the decline that we've seen in jobs in the Western Cape and KZN, is it maybe because of declining activity in the agricultural sector linked to the US tariffs? And the second question really is on the issue around the arguments that have been made by some, especially with the high unemployment rate among the Africans, that by sheer number of their population, they will be the most affected by the unemployment rate in South Africa. I just want to hear what the question will respond to. Thank you.
The panel will indicate once they're ready to respond to your questions. Yes, ma'am.
Just one more, sorry. Around the informal markets, what were the drivers of those job losses? It seems quite a lot, 19,000. I don't know if we have insights to that as well. Sorry, thank you.
While they are preparing the numbers that they will talk to in terms of specific areas, I would say it's too early to tell if the U.S. tariffs that, the tariffs that the U.S. has imposed on South Africa are having an effect. It's quite early to tell. But one thing that we know also is that outside the tariffs is that agriculture is seasonal. So you look at your December times, there are times when you are planting and plowing and will always attract a lot of people. And after that, it may drop and it moves up and down. Whereas come harvesting time, you may see movement. But graduate unemployment, look at the previous quarter, for example. It was beginning of the year. So we saw more graduates coming into the labor force actively looking for employment. So once you see them coming, whether they are unemployed or not, it will show. So you see two groups coming in when first quarter. You see people who come from matric, who didn't go to universities as well as graduates. But the argument that because Africans are in the majority, by that we should see them more unemployed doesn't apply, because we are not talking about the share of unemployment of Africans in the space of the national population. So what we are doing is that we take the colored population group and we look at their unemployment alone within the colored population group. And of course, when we look at the Africans, we look at their unemployment within themselves. So that would only explain if we were looking at the share of unemployment as a total of all population groups. And if generally, if you look at the white population group, Indian, Asian, if things were the same, even when the Indian population group is the smallest, we would see the unemployment being the same for all population groups. So the sheer numbers do not necessarily explain that. Having said so, you look at other nations, and we don't have to talk to them one by one, where the black people are in the minority, but you do find that their unemployment remains high. So if that was the case, you would see why the white population group in those countries having a higher unemployment rate, because they have larger numbers. So it's not always the case. Thank you.
Good morning. When we look at industries, specifically on agriculture, we saw a net loss of 24,000, and this was mainly in the Western Cape. And I think one of the questions was what caused the decline in the Western Cape. And when we do look at the data, we realize that agriculture in the Western Cape lost most of the jobs at about 42,000. And when you look at the trend over time, since we started with the QLFS in 2008, there's this trend that in the second quarter of each year from 2008, in most of those second quarter, we lost jobs in the Western Cape. And we saw this mainly during COVID, where we lost over 300,000 jobs. And we can say that it was mainly because of COVID. But the trend has, there's this trend that we lose jobs in the Western Cape during the second quarter. Also, when we look at the main sub-industries in agriculture that contributed to the loss in agriculture, specifically in the Western Cape, growing of crops, which also was recorded nationally. We lost jobs in growing of crops, farming of animals mainly, forestry, as well as in fish hatcheries and fish farming. Also, when we look at KwaZulu-Natal, also we saw some losses in agriculture of about 14,000. And this was also in growing of crops as well as farming of animals. And then when we look at the sub-industries of finance, we lost about 24,000 jobs in finance, and this was mainly in it was mainly in computer and related activities, as well as in financial intermediation. This includes banks, except insurances and pension funds. So this is where we saw most jobs that were lost, and this was mainly in the formal sector.
Just to add, Donkozo, you asked a question about the graduates. We've noted that for this quarter, the number of graduates, over time we've noted that unemployment rate of the graduates is increasing. And then for this quarter, the graduate employment number declined with 12,000, whereas the unemployment increased with 272,000, while the not economically active of the graduates also increased with 5,000.
Thank you, Ms. Poshoko. Bones, if you can please indicate if there are any questions online.
Mr. Chair, there are questions. Can you confirm if I'm audible?
You are audible.
Thank you. There is a question from Nobukanya Ndambo from Eyewitness News. On the talks that followed the criticism against SSA on how data is collected and the exclusion of the informal sector, has there been indication from SSA that it will change how the QLFS is conducted? If so, can we please get clarity on the proposed changes? What will the revised survey make provision for? Would the changes take effect before the Q3 survey, or is it still subject to discussion? We have a question as well from Helena. Please, can you give more details about the changes to the questionnaire from this quarter? Then the last one is just a technical issue that our team is currently attending to, where the stakeholder is indicating that the publication on the site is not loading. That is noted. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bongs.
With regards to the changes in the questionnaire, this is how it's, okay, let me respond to it this way. We are members of the working group with the ILO and the ICLSs. Now, what's going to change, it will be based on the 3 ICLSs that have been adopted by the ILO. The first ICLS is talking about employment, work, and labor underutilization. With regards to that ICLS, we are saying, the ICLS is saying that employment and unemployment, specifically employment, is for pay or profit. The good thing about this is that the Statistics South Africa has adopted this definition of employment when we introduced the QLFS in 2008. So expectation is that there will be no changes in terms of employment when we introduce the new questionnaire. And unemployment definition also is not going to be affected because of the changes that we have implemented in the questionnaire. Now, with the ICLS 19, it says that in addition to unemployment, there are other measures of labor underutilization that needs to be used by different users for different reasons in terms of, because we cannot measure the health of the economy by only one indicator, which is unemployment rate. So we will be adding additional measures into our reports on the labor underutilization, which basically looks at the potential labor force, those people that are willing, or those people that are available to work but did not search for work during the reference period, or they searched for work but they were not available to take up a job during the reference period. So we are taking into consideration all those people, because just because they did not look for work, we cannot say that they are not in the labor market. We are including them under the potential labor force. Now, we are also taking into consideration time-related underemployment, which talks to the people who were employed, but they wanted to work more hours if the hours were paid. So those are some of the things that we are going to include into our reports in the third quarter. So the new questionnaire it's in the field right now, but the reports of that questionnaire will be reported in the in the fourth quarter of this year, which will be in the next, November, in November. Now, the second standard that was adopted, which talks to statistics on work relationship, we have included questions on status in employment, which asks people about whether they are employees, employers, own account workers, or they are contributing family workers. Now, those are self-classification, but now the ICLS says, let's go further and ensure that people are classifying themselves properly. For example, we have Uber drivers, we have people who book a space in a salon, hairdressers who only book a chair in a salon and do their business. But who is giving them clients, who is determining their prices in terms of how much they should charge? The Uber drivers, some of them classify themselves as employees, but in the actual sense, they're dependent contractors. So those are some of the concepts that we are introducing in terms of statistics in work relationships. Then the third one, which talks to informal economy. We've been measuring informal sector in terms of registration for VAT or income tax, as well as size of the establishment. Now, not size can be defined in different ways, and a big enterprise with 5 people does not necessarily mean that it's in the informal sector. And now the new resolution says the main criteria run for measuring informal sector should be registration, in addition to other measures. For example, keeping accounts for tax purposes, which basically will take those people that are paying income tax into account, and also looking at, in terms of registration, the people who have registered their businesses with CIPC, as well as those that have registered for VAT through SARS, will be taken into consideration. And then, meaning size does not matter. Yeah, I think that's the right word. Yeah. And then in terms of informal employment, we have been saying that informal employment is anybody whose job, it is about the job that the person holds, not about the sector that they work in. Informal sector is about the workplace, the business that they work in. Informal job is about the work that a person holds, meaning we look at basically social protection measures that are part of the decent work indicators. If you are in a job, are you entitled to social insurance, which is the main criteria that has to be used based on the new resolution. We are not saying that we have not been following ILO or ICLS resolutions. We have been following them. But remember, over years, things change, and we change with what has been adopted in 2023, which we were part of those changes. So countries at this current moment are implementing the 21st ICLS on informal sector, on informal employment. So we are not doing anything out of the place or because of what is going on in the media. So those are basically the main changes. Maybe just to add that in terms of informal employment, we were using medical aid written contract as part of, as well as social insurance to measure informal employment. But written contract and medical aid, we have been advised that it has been recommended that they should be excluded, but instead we look at social insurance or pension in this case. And if any respondent says that they are not entitled to pension, then the use of paid annual leave as well as paid sick leave together should be used to measure any person who is in the informal employment. And we should also remember that informal sector and informal employment are, in fact, everybody who is in the informal sector is included in informal employment, in addition to all those other people who are either in formal sector, but they are not entitled to certain benefits that are used to measure informal employment.
Good day, colleagues. Desiree, I think he gave more details, but I think in summary, we are not making changes because we are not adhering to standards. We've been adhering to standards throughout since QLFS started. We are refining our measures to make sure that we are measuring and giving additional indicators. We're still measuring informal sector as we've always measuring it, with some refined measures. Just to give some insight in some of the indicators that the SGF shared today. Let's start with the graduates. We said that we're having about 272 graduates. If you look at what type of degrees that they have, we are saying that 24% of them, they have universities or technical or college qualification on business, commerce and management studies. Some, they indicated that they have about 18%, they have education and training and development, and 10% have law, and about 7% they have engineering and technology. So if you ask me, those who say they are graduate and they are unemployed, what type of qualification do they have? I've given to you the numbers. The last point is that if you look at community and social services, it had a loss of jobs, and I think SG already presented on the previous slides that speak to these numbers, that most of the people who are employed in this particular industry is women. So you could imagine that those who are going to be suffered the most is going to be women, because this industry is employing most of the women. Thank you.
Thank you for the responses to the questions. Time is not in our favor, but yeah, we can still open the floor for one or two questions online and Dr. Joy.
Felicia, just a request for the question that I asked earlier to be attended to. It was the one on social services and whether the job losses in that sector has any relation to funding cuts by the US. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, I was intending to respond to that question. My apologies. So yes, indeed, we are seeing a decline under public administration. That's where you're seeing your EPWP. We're seeing a decline. We'll share with you the details in terms of the numbers, in actual numbers. We're also seeing under health and social workers. And this is where you're seeing most of your NGOs that are in this space. And I think that's where you're seeing the impact of the funding. We are also seeing a drop, about 27,000 jobs lost. So indeed, we are seeing that impact, and we'll be monitoring it through all the quarters moving forward. Thank you.